Emergency Management Log, Day 1, 6 to 1400 hours. Coordinator, Varric Sloan, Regional Emergency Management Agency. Classification, Routine Elevated. The coffee was still hot when the first alert came through. 6:47 Eastern Standard Time. Standard Nuclear Readiness Notification from Northcom. Nothing unusual there. We run these exercises quarterly, always with the same bureaucratic precision that makes my job both predictable and mind-numbing. 15 years of emergency coordination, and I've seen every drill, every protocol, every carefully choreographed dance of governmental preparedness. What caught my attention wasn't the alert itself. It was the timestamp. 6 hours, 47 minutes, and 33 seconds. I've processed thousands of emergency notifications. Military communications follow strict protocols. Alerts come through on the hour, half-hour, or quarter-hour marks. Precise timing is part of command efficiency. 33 seconds past the minute? That's sloppy. The kind of detail that would get a communications officer written up. I flagged it in my log and moved on. Coffee was getting cold. The second alert arrived at 9 hours, 13 minutes, and 33 seconds. Same unusual timestamp. This time from UCOM, European Command, issuing parallel readiness notifications. I pulled up the Global Emergency Coordination interface, watching the cascade of Allied notifications flow across my screens. Britain, France, Germany, all confirming receipt of nuclear readiness protocols. All timestamped at 13 minutes, 33 seconds past the respective hour. Enya, I called to my telecommunications specialist across the bullpen. You seeing any pattern irregularities in the NATO coordination channels? Enya Lark looked up from her bank of monitoring equipment, brushing a strand of dark hair from her eyes. 28 years old, sharp as they come, with an intuitive understanding of electromagnetic frequencies that borders on supernatural. If anyone would catch anomalies in our communication systems, it would be her. Funny you should ask. She swiveled her chair toward me, frowning at a tablet displaying signal analysis charts. I've been tracking some weird EM readings since about 6 this morning. Brief spikes, always preceding official alerts by exactly 3 minutes. Like something's preparing the channels. Preparing them for what? No idea. The spikes don't match any known interference patterns. Almost like the electromagnetic spectrum is being tuned. Does that make sense? It didn't. But after 15 years of emergency management, I've learned that the impossible becomes routine if you encounter it often enough. Natural disasters don't follow textbook patterns. Human behavior under stress defies prediction. Systems fail in ways that surprise their designers. Still, this felt different. The third alert came at 13 hours, 33 minutes, and 33 seconds. Pacific Command this time, confirming readiness protocols for all nuclear assets in the Asia-Pacific theater. Same precise timestamp deviation. Same electromagnetic spike 3 minutes prior, just as Enya had predicted. I pulled up the global chronometer, cross-referencing the alert times with standard coordination protocols. The pattern was unmistakable now, 6 hours and 26 minutes between each alert. Not standard military spacing. Not based on any emergency management timeline I recognized. But familiar somehow. Draven, I need you to look at something. Colonel Draven Cross, our military liaison, approached my workstation with the measured stride of someone who's spent 20 years following orders and giving them in equal measure. Tall, gray-tempered, with eyes that miss nothing and express less. If the military brass was planning something unusual, he'd know about it. What's eating you, Sloan? I showed him the alert pattern, the timestamps, the spacing intervals. Watched his expression shift from professional interest to something approaching concern. That's not standard protocol, he said after a long moment. Readiness exercises follow established patterns. This, he trailed off, studying the timeline more closely. 6 hours, 26 minutes. That's not based on any operational necessity, I know. Could it be a new coordination system? Something from the Joint Chiefs? Negative. Major protocol changes go through proper channels. I'd have been briefed. He straightened, and I caught something in his posture that hadn't been there before. Tension. The kind that comes from recognizing a problem you can't immediately solve. I'll make some calls, he said. Quietly. The fourth alert should have come at 19 hours, 59 minutes, and 33 seconds. I found myself watching the chronometer as the timestamp approached, a growing sense of unease settling in my stomach like bad coffee. 19 hours, 59 minutes, and 30 seconds. 31. 32. Nothing. 20 hours came and went. Still nothing. Then, at 20 hours, 13 minutes, and 33 seconds, every emergency communication system in the building activated simultaneously. Not alerts this time. Emergency broadcasts. Live feeds from world leaders, all speaking at the same moment across different time zones. The coordination was impossible. Leaders don't synchronize statements without weeks of diplomatic preparation. Yet here they were. I switched between feeds, watching presidents and prime ministers deliver identical messages in different languages. The same cadence, the same phrasing, even the same pauses and emphasis patterns. Final contingency protocols are now in effect. Global security requires immediate compliance. Nuclear assets will be deployed if necessary. The words were translated differently, but the meaning was universal. An ultimatum, from world leaders to their own populations. Enya appeared at my shoulder, her face pale. Varek, the electromagnetic readings just spiked beyond anything I've ever recorded. Whatever's causing these synchronizations, it's not coming from our communication systems. What do you mean? I mean the signals are being broadcast to our leaders, not by them. Something's feeding them these words. Across the bullpen, Sorel Marsh, our civilian coordination specialist, was fielding calls from shelter coordinators across the region. Even from where I sat, I could hear the confusion in her voice as she tried to process reports that made no sense. Mass evacuation requests, she called over. But not from disaster zones, from major population centers. And they're all asking for the same relocation coordinates. I pulled up the coordinates she transmitted, plotted them on the regional map. They formed a perfect geometric pattern. Draven returned from his calls, his face grim. I can't reach anyone up the chain of command. Every military contact I have is either unavailable or giving me responses that sound scripted, like they're reading from the same playbook. The same one our world leaders just used. Exactly the same. That's when Quinric Vale approached my desk. Dr. Quinric Vale, former government scientist, current emergency management consultant. Officially, he advises us on technological threats and system vulnerabilities. Unofficially, he's the smartest person in the building and the most nervous. Today, he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Varek, I need to speak with you. Privately. We stepped into my office, and he closed the door behind us with more care than necessary. The final contingency, he said without preamble. You've heard the term before, haven't you? Today's the first time. Why? Because I helped design it. 40 years ago, when I was much younger and much more naive. He ran a hand through thinning hair. I thought we were developing emergency protocols for nuclear crisis management. Fail-safes for preventing accidental war. And you weren't. The final contingency isn't what you think it is, Varek. It never was. Before I could respond, every screen in the building flickered simultaneously. For exactly 33 seconds, they displayed the same image, an intricate symbol that seemed to shift and move even as I stared at it. Ancient looking, with geometric patterns that hurt to focus on directly. When the screens returned to normal, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The timestamps on every system had synchronized. Every computer, every monitoring device, every communication terminal in the building now showed the exact same time down to the millisecond. But the displayed time was 3 minutes ahead of my analog watch. Quinric, I said quietly, what exactly did you help them design? He met my eyes, and I saw fear there. Real, bone-deep terror from a man who understood something I didn't. Something that was never meant to be used, he whispered. Something that should have stayed buried. Outside, the first sirens began to wail. Alert log entry 14 hours, 33 minutes, and 47 seconds. Status, elevated critical. Next protocol review, immediate. Notes, standard procedures may be inadequate. Recommend enhanced monitoring of all global coordination channels. Personal note, the third alert came at exactly 13:33. That's when I noticed all the timestamps were matching ancient astronomical events. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. Emergency Management Log, Day 1, 1400 hours, Day 2, 8 o'clock. Coordinator, Varek Sloan, Regional Emergency Management Agency. Classification, critical, unprecedented. The sirens stopped at exactly 15 hours. Not gradually, not in the staggered pattern typical of all clear signals. Every emergency siren in the Tri-County area went silent at the same instant, as if someone had thrown a master switch. In 15 years of emergency management, I'd never seen coordination like that. Our systems aren't designed for simultaneous cutoff. It's a safety redundancy feature. Multiple independent networks can't just sync up and stop unless they're being controlled by something with access to all of them. Enya, tell me you've got an explanation for that. She was hunched over her monitoring station, surrounded by tablets displaying wavelength analyses that looked like abstract art. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she hadn't noticed. When electromagnetic anomalies grabbed her attention, everything else ceased to exist. It's not coming from our emergency broadcast infrastructure, she said without looking up. The cutoff signal originated from everywhere, like the entire electromagnetic spectrum just decided to coordinate itself. That's not how radio waves work. I know that. You know that. Apparently nobody told the radio waves. Draven appeared beside my desk, his usual military composure cracked around the edges. I finally reached General Morrison at Pentagon Emergency Operations. Conversation lasted exactly 90 seconds before the line went dead. Equipment failure? No. He hung up. But not before he told me something that doesn't make sense. Draven's jaw tightened. He said the final contingency has been active since 1952. That stopped me cold. That's impossible. Nuclear doctrine from the 50s. Doesn't match anything we know about current emergency protocols. I know, but Morrison used terminology I've never heard before. Called it the summoning protocols instead of final contingency. Said I should check the restricted archives if I wanted to understand. What restricted archives? That's the problem. I don't have clearance for anything he was talking about, and I've had top secret clearance for 12 years. Sorel's voice cut across the bullpen, strained with the kind of frustration that comes from dealing with impossible logistics. Varek, I need you to hear this. I walked over to her coordination station, where she was managing civilian evacuation requests on multiple screens. Sorel had been coordinating mass population movements for 8 years, hurricanes, floods, chemical spills. She knew how people behaved in crisis situations, understood the flow patterns of panic and the rhythm of emergency response. What she was showing me didn't match any of that. Look at these evacuation requests, she said, highlighting entries on her screen. They started coming in about an hour after the world leader broadcasts. All from major population centers, all requesting the same thing. I scanned the requests. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, all asking for immediate mass evacuation protocols. But not due to any identified threat. They're evacuating because of the ultimatum broadcasts? That's just it. They're not running away from anything. They're asking to be relocated to specific coordinates. And look at this. She pulled up a map showing the requested destination points. Every major city is asking to send their populations to the same geometric locations we identified earlier. The pattern was even clearer now. 17 coordinates forming a complex geometric shape across North America. Too precise to be coincidental, too large scale to be planned by any single organization. It gets worse, Sorel continued. I've been talking to evacuation coordinators in other countries. Same pattern, same geometric precision. Every major population center on Earth is requesting relocation to points that form identical patterns. That's impossible. You can't coordinate global population movements without decades of preparation and resources that don't officially exist, she finished. I know, but the requests are coming through proper channels, using correct authorization codes from verified emergency coordinators. On paper, everything looks legitimate. I stared at the map, trying to process the implications. Global coordination on this scale required infrastructure that would be visible, trackable, documented somewhere in the administrative systems I'd worked with for 15 years. But I'd never seen any evidence of it. That's when Quinric approached, carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who'd just confirmed their worst fears. "Varek, I've been digging through old research files. Archives I helped classify 40 years ago." His voice was tight with controlled panic. "The final contingency wasn't developed by the military." "What do you mean?" "I mean the Department of Defense was the cover story. The real development happened through a network of research institutions, private corporations, and government contractors that didn't officially exist. We called it the Confluence Project." He showed me documents on his tablet, research proposals, funding authorizations, personnel assignments, all dated from the 1950s through the 1980s, all classified at levels I'd never heard of. "We thought we were developing advanced emergency protocols," Quinric continued. "Crisis management for scenarios beyond conventional planning. Nuclear war, global pandemic, ecological collapse. But the parameters we were given didn't match any realistic emergency scenario." "What kind of parameters?" "Population relocation to specific geographic coordinates. Electromagnetic coordination systems for global communication. Protocols for managing supernatural crisis events." The temperature in the building dropped 10 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. Not gradually. Not due to HVAC malfunction. Every surface, every piece of equipment, every breath of air went cold simultaneously. Frost began forming on the windows despite the October warmth outside. Enya's monitoring equipment screamed with alerts. "Massive electromagnetic event," she called out, her voice tight with concentration. "But it's not coming from any identifiable source. It's like the planet's magnetic field just shifted." Through the frosted windows, I could see something that made my emergency coordinator training completely irrelevant. The sky was wrong. Not cloudy, not stormy. Wrong. Colors that didn't belong in nature bled across the horizon like watercolors on wet paper. The sun was still visible, but its light felt different, thinner, somehow, as if it was shining through layers of reality that hadn't been there this morning. "Quinric," I said quietly, "what exactly were you researching?" Before he could answer, every communication system in the building activated again. But not emergency broadcasts this time. Something else. A sound. Low frequency, barely audible, but felt more than heard. It resonated in my chest, made my teeth ache, triggered some primal recognition that this was not a sound meant for human ears. Enya's equipment showed it registering across the entire electromagnetic spectrum, impossible for natural phenomena. On the screens, text began appearing. Not transmitted, not typed, manifesting letter by letter in languages I didn't recognize, followed by translations that scrolled beneath. The thresholds weaken. Convergence approaches. Those who prepared the way will be rewarded. Those who resist will be absorbed. The final contingency is no longer contingent. Draven grabbed my shoulder. "Varek, look outside." Through the impossible colors in the sky, aircraft were moving. Military transport planes, commercial airliners, helicopters, all flying in perfect formation toward the coordinates we'd identified on our maps. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all heading to the same geometric points. "Those aren't emergency evacuations," Sorel whispered. "That's pilgrimage." The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Ice began forming on the inside surfaces of the building. "Quinric," I said, my breath visible in the sudden cold, "I need you to tell me exactly what the Confluence project was really designed to do." He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and understood more than he wanted to. "We were preparing humanity for something that was supposed to stay in the realm of theory," he said. "We thought we were developing contingencies for impossible scenarios. Reality incursion, dimensional breach, contact with entities that exist outside conventional physics. And now I think those scenarios were never theoretical. I think someone's been planning this for 70 years. The lights flickered, but not from electrical problems. The illumination itself seemed uncertain, as if photons weren't sure how to behave anymore. Outside, more aircraft filled the impossible sky, and I could see lights in the distance. Thousands of them, moving along the highways toward the coordinates that formed patterns too precise for coincidence. "Quinric," I said, pulling him aside as the building grew colder and the sky grew stranger. "What you're telling me, it sounds like you helped design protocols for the end of the world." He met my eyes, and I saw not just fear there, but guilt. Deep, career-defining, soul-crushing guilt. "That's exactly what I'm telling you," he whispered. "And I think it's starting." Alert log entry 7 hours, 47 minutes, and 33 seconds. Status: unprecedented reality breach protocols. Global coordination confirmed active. Next protocol review, survival dependent. Personal note: Quinric pulled me aside after the briefing. "The final contingency isn't what you think," he whispered. "It never was." I'm beginning to understand what he meant. Standard emergency protocols don't cover this. I don't think anything covers this. Emergency management log, day 2, 8 to 1800 hours. Coordinator, Varek Sloan. Classification level, eyes only. 8:15, archive access request. Quinric's words from last night kept circling through my mind like a broken emergency broadcast. The final contingency isn't what you think. It never was. I'd been managing crisis protocols for 15 years. I knew every contingency plan in the federal database, every nuclear response scenario, every doomsday protocol from DEFCON 1 to civil defense measures that hadn't been updated since the Cold War. But Quinric's haunted expression suggested something deeper than outdated paperwork. "I need access to the pre-digital archives," I told him when he arrived at 0800, coffee in hand but looking like he hadn't slept. "The stuff from before everything went electronic." He nodded too quickly. "I was hoping you'd say that. There are documents. Physical files that never made it into the computer systems." His hands shook slightly as he pulled out a security badge I'd never seen before. "This gets us into Sublevel 3. But Varek, once you see this, you can't unsee it." The weight of his words settled over me like radiation exposure. Invisible, but inevitable. 9:30, Sublevel 3 archives. The elevator descended further than I knew the building went. The fluorescent lights flickered with each floor, casting shadows that seemed to move independently. By the time we reached Sublevel 3, the air tasted metallic, like breathing through old coins. "How long have you had clearance for this level?" I asked as Quinric's badge opened security doors I'd never noticed on building schematics. "Since 1987, he said quietly. "The year I was recruited out of graduate school. They told me I was working on emergency preparedness protocols. I thought I was helping save lives." The archive room stretched beyond the reach of the overhead lights. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls like tombstones, each labeled with dates spanning back to 1954. The air smelled of aged paper and something else, something that reminded me of the ozone smell after lightning strikes. "Start with 1954, Quinric directed, pulling out a thick folder marked Final Contingency, Original Protocols. That's when it really began. 10:45, Document Analysis. The first document was a memo dated March 15, 1954, signed by someone named Dr. Elias Thorne. The letterhead read Department of Strategic Resources, Occult Division. Occult Division. I read the memo 3 times before the words stopped seeming like a practical joke. Initial testing confirms that nuclear fission can be manipulated to create dimensional apertures rather than pure destructive force. The energy signature required matches theoretical calculations for summoning protocols found in the Prague manuscript. Recommend proceeding with final contingency development under cover of traditional weapons program. "Quinric," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is talking about using nuclear weapons for..." "What? Summoning something?" He was already pulling out more files, his movements mechanical, practiced. "Keep reading. It gets worse." The next document was a map dated 1962, showing nuclear missile sites across the United States. But someone had drawn lines connecting them in a pattern that made my emergency coordinator brain start calculating distances and geometries. The sites formed a perfect pentagram across the continental United States, with additional points marked in Russia, China, the UK, France, and India. 6 continents, I breathed. The nuclear powers, they're all part of this pattern. Global ley line intersections, Quinric confirmed. Every major nuclear facility built since 1954 has been positioned according to these coordinates. We thought we were building weapons. We were building the largest summoning circle in human history. 12 o'clock, Enya's report. My radio crackled with Enya's voice, cutting through the archive's oppressive silence. Varek, you need to hear this. I've been tracking those electromagnetic anomalies, and they're not random. I grabbed the radio, grateful for her familiar voice. Go ahead, Enya. Every time there's a spike in the EM readings, it corresponds exactly with the timing of the emergency alerts. But here's the thing. The spikes are happening 3 minutes before the alerts are officially transmitted. Something's generating the electromagnetic signature first, then the alerts follow. Quinric and I exchanged glances. What kind of something? I asked. That's just it. The signature doesn't match any known technology. It's like, imagine if you could see sound waves, but these are in frequencies that shouldn't exist. The equipment is reading them, but according to physics, they shouldn't be there. I looked down at the document in my hands, a 1967 technical manual titled Dimensional Resonance and Nuclear Catalysis. The electromagnetic frequencies listed in the manual matched Enya's impossible readings exactly. Enya, send me the exact coordinates where you're detecting the strongest signals. Already did. Check your secure terminal. 1330, coordinate verification. The coordinates Enya sent matched the 1962 map perfectly. Every nuclear facility showing electromagnetic anomalies sat precisely on the intersection points of what the documents called dimensional convergence lines. But there was something else. I pulled out a current map of the emergency alert zones, the areas where civilians were being evacuated. They formed a secondary pattern, smaller circles around each nuclear facility, like ripples in a pond. They're not evacuating people away from the sites, I realized. They're evacuating them to specific locations around the sites. Quinric nodded grimly. Containment circles. The people aren't being evacuated for safety. They're being positioned for the ritual. The word ritual hung in the air like a death sentence. 1445, Sorel's disturbing report. Another radio transmission, this time from Sorel at the civilian evacuation center. Varek, something's wrong with the evacuees. They're not acting like scared people anymore. What do you mean? They're organized, synchronized. I've been watching them for the past hour, and they're all doing the same things at the same time. Checking their phones at exactly the same moment, turning to face the same direction, even blinking in unison. It's like watching a choreographed performance, but nobody's directing it. I felt my stomach drop. Are they responding to commands? Following orders? That's the thing. There are no orders, no announcements, no instructions. They just know what to do. And Varek? They're all facing northeast, toward the nuclear facility. I pulled out a compass and checked the bearing from Sorel's location to our nearest nuclear site. Northeast, exactly 47 degrees. The same bearing listed in a 1971 document titled Optimal Orientation for Dimensional Reception. 1600 hours, military confirmation. Draven's voice came through on the military frequency, tight with controlled panic. Sloan, we have a problem. Multiple units are reporting the same thing. Personnel are requesting reassignment to positions that match those old Cold War maps you asked me about. Requesting? Or demanding? Both. And here's the kicker. They're not following normal chain of command. Lieutenants are giving orders to colonels, and the colonels are following them. It's like military hierarchy has been replaced by something else. I looked at Quinric, who was pulling out another file. Something else like what? Like they all know their place in some other kind of order, some other kind of authority structure. The file Quinric held was labeled Personnel Integration Protocols, Phase 3. It described a process where military and civilian personnel would be gradually prepared for dimensional transition through electromagnetic conditioning and hierarchical restructuring. They've been preparing people for this for decades, I whispered. The electromagnetic pulses, the evacuation patterns, the military repositioning, it's all part of the same process. 1730, pattern recognition. I spread all the documents across the archive table, overlaying maps and timelines and personnel reports. The pattern was undeniable. Every nuclear facility built since 1954 was positioned on ancient geographical power points. Every emergency protocol developed since then was designed to move people into specific formations around these sites. Every military unit, every civilian evacuation zone, every government emergency response, all of it was choreographed to serve something called the final contingency. And the final contingency wasn't about nuclear war. It was about opening doorways. "Quinn-Rick," I said, my voice steady despite the terror crawling up my spine. "How many people in the government know about this?" He was quiet for a long moment. "At the highest levels, maybe a dozen. But there are thousands of people who know pieces of it. People like me who thought they were working on legitimate emergency preparedness. People who've been implementing protocols without understanding what they're really for. And the people who do understand, they're not people anymore. Haven't been for years. There's something else wearing human faces, preparing our world for their masters." 1800 hours, terrible understanding. As we prepared to leave the archives, I took one last look at the files. 70 years of preparation. Thousands of personnel unknowingly participating in the largest occult ritual in human history. Nuclear weapons repurposed as summoning catalysts. Entire populations positioned like pieces on a chessboard. My emergency coordinator training had taught me to think in terms of resource allocation, communication networks, and crisis response. But this was bigger than any crisis I'd ever imagined. This was the deliberate orchestration of the end of our world. The radio crackled with another transmission from Enya. "Varek, the electromagnetic readings are spiking again. But this time they're coming from all 6 continents simultaneously." I looked at the global map one more time. The coordinates weren't random. They formed a perfect pentagram across 6 continents, with each point positioned at a major nuclear facility. And at the center of each continental formation, the civilian evacuation zones created smaller pentagrams. They're not just opening one doorway, I realized. They're opening dozens of them, all at once, all connected. The final contingency wasn't just about letting something into our world. It was about letting our world be completely consumed by something else. As we rode the elevator back to the surface, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were ascending not just through floors, but through layers of reality that were about to be peeled away like onion skin. The emergency alert system had been warning us about the wrong emergency all along. Personal note: if anyone finds this log, know that the emergency protocols you've been trained to follow are lies. The real emergency is about to begin, and everything we thought we knew about preparedness is useless. The coordinates aren't random. They never were. V.S. Emergency Management Log, Varek Sloan. Day 2, 1800 hours, Day 3, 6 o'clock. Classification: Unauthorized access, protocol deviation. 1847. The power grid cascaded like dominoes across the eastern seaboard. Not surge failures, deliberate shutdowns following a pattern I've never seen in 15 years of emergency coordination. Each blackout zone corresponded exactly to the coordinates Enya traced yesterday. The ones forming that damned pentagram. I'm writing this by flashlight in Sublevel 3, the emergency bunker that's supposed to be our last resort command center. Except I'm not supposed to be here. Director Castellanos revoked my security clearance at 1830, citing deviation from established protocols and unauthorized intelligence sharing. Unauthorized intelligence sharing. That's what they're calling it when I asked why our nuclear countdown matched ancient astronomical alignments. 1915. Enya's voice crackled through the emergency radio, barely audible through the static that's been plaguing every frequency since the ultimatum began. "Varek, you need to hear this. I've been monitoring government backdoors in the communication systems. They're not backdoors. They're primary channels. Our normal emergency networks were the backup all along." The revelation hit like ice water in my chest. Every protocol I'd memorized, every drill I'd run, every system I'd trusted, they were window dressing. The real emergency management had been running parallel to our operations for decades. How long? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Best guess? Since the emergency broadcast system was established. Maybe longer. Varek, they've been preparing for this specific event since before either of us was born. 1933. Draven Cross burst through the bunker entrance, his usually pristine military bearing replaced by something I'd never seen in him: fear. Not the tactical wariness of a soldier, but the existential terror of a man whose worldview was crumbling. "My unit received stand-down orders," he said, collapsing into one of the monitoring chairs. "Not from Central Command. From personnel I've never heard of, using authentication codes that don't exist in any manual I know. But the codes worked, Sloan. They worked perfectly." He pulled out a tablet, hands shaking as he showed me deployment maps. "Look at these troop movements. Every unit, every base, every strategic position. We're not preparing for nuclear war. We're hurting civilians." The maps showed massive population relocations, all flowing toward the same coordinates that kept appearing in our intelligence. The nuclear facilities, the ley line intersections, the points of that global pentagram. Hurting them toward what? But even as I asked, the pieces were assembling in my mind like a jigsaw puzzle made of nightmares. 2012. Sorel's report came through the emergency channel, her usually calm shelter coordinator voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Varek, the evacuation centers aren't evacuation centers. They're collection points. The buses aren't taking people to safety. They're taking them to designated coordinates. And the people, God, Varek, they're going willingly. More than willingly. They're eager." The radio crackled with interference that almost sounded like chanting. "It started about an hour ago," Sorel continued. "Mass synchronization. Hundreds of people suddenly standing up, walking in the same direction, humming the same tune. A tune none of them had ever heard before. When I tried to stop some of them, they looked at me with these empty, blissful expressions and said, 'It's time for the final contingency.' 2045. I violated every protocol I'd ever sworn to uphold and accessed Quinric Vale's classified research files using my emergency override codes. What I found made the hair on my arms stand up like I was in an electrical field. Project Final Contingency. Established 1952. Objective: facilitate controlled dimensional breach using coordinated nuclear detonation array to enable entity manifestation and reality integration. Entity manifestation. Reality integration. The nuclear countdown wasn't for war. It wasn't even for destruction. It was for summoning something that should have stayed wherever the hell it came from. 2130. The interference on all channels suddenly cleared, replaced by a voice speaking in perfect unison across every emergency frequency. Not one voice, thousands of voices, all speaking the same words at exactly the same time. Government officials, military commanders, emergency coordinators from around the world, all reciting coordinates and countdown confirmations in that same empty, blissful tone Sorel had described. Phase 3 initiation confirmed. Civilian collection at 93% efficiency. Military compliance at 98%. Nuclear array synchronized and ready for final contingency activation. Countdown resuming. T-9 hours, 37 minutes. I recognized some of those voices. People I'd worked with for years. People I'd trusted with my life during past emergencies. Draven was staring at the radio like it had grown teeth. "Those are NATO authentication protocols," he whispered. "Perfect military procedure. Except the words they're saying aren't in any manual." 2215. Enya appeared in the bunker entrance, her telecommunications equipment strapped to her back like some kind of technical refugee. Her face was pale, but her eyes held the sharp focus of someone who'd found the pattern in the chaos. "I know what they're doing," she said, immediately setting up her gear. "The electromagnetic readings aren't random interference, they're carrier waves. The entire global communication network has been converted into a single transmission array. Every cell tower, every satellite, every piece of connected technology is now part of one massive signal." She showed us readouts that looked like nothing I'd ever seen in standard emergency communications. "It's not sending information, Varek. It's sending instructions. Direct neural interface through electromagnetic frequency modulation. That's why people are synchronizing. That's why they're all moving toward the coordinates. The signal is literally rewriting their behavioral patterns." "How are we still resistant?" Draven asked. Enya gestured to the bunker walls. "This facility was built during the Cold War, designed to block electromagnetic warfare. The shielding that was supposed to protect us from Soviet EMP weapons is protecting us from whatever this signal is doing to human brains. 2347. We tried to contact other emergency management centers, other military installations, anyone who might still be operating independently. What we found was worse than silence. Every official emergency response was coordinated. Every military action was synchronized. Every evacuation protocol was directing civilians toward the nuclear facilities. But more than that, it was working perfectly. Decades of emergency management infrastructure, crisis response protocols, public trust and authority, all of it had been designed to enable this moment. The greatest emergency management operation in human history, and it was being used to deliver our entire species to something that wanted to reshape reality itself. 030, Day 3. The countdown displays began appearing everywhere, not just on emergency broadcasts, but on every screen, every device, every piece of technology capable of displaying information. Digital billboards, smartphone screens, even old analog television sets somehow showing the same countdown timer. T-minus 8 hours, 57 minutes. But the most terrifying part wasn't the countdown. It was the comments, the social media posts, the public responses. Millions of people expressing excitement, gratitude, even religious fervor about the approaching final contingency. Finally, one post read, "Finally, we can evolve beyond this limited existence." "The old reality was so constraining," said another. "Soon we'll be free." 1:15. Sorel's last independent transmission came through at 1:15. Static-filled, desperate, but unmistakably her own voice rather than the synchronized chorus that had replaced most official communications. "Varek, they came for the holdouts." Military units, but not entirely human anymore. They moved wrong, spoke in unison, and their eyes. God, their eyes were like black mirrors. They took everyone who was still resisting. I'm the only one left in this sector, and I can hear them coming back. The transmission cut to static, then resumed with Sorel's voice in perfect synchronization with the global chorus. Collection complete. Civilian compliance achieved. Proceeding to final staging areas. 2:33. Draven broke protocol and attempted direct contact with his commanding officer using emergency authentication codes. The response came back in his CO's voice, but with that same synchronized emptiness we'd been hearing all night. "Lieutenant Cross, your independent operation is no longer required. Report to Staging Area 7 for final contingency preparation. Resistance to the new paradigm is futile and ultimately harmful to species evolution." Draven stared at the radio for a long moment, then deliberately smashed it against the bunker wall. "That's it," he said. "Chain of command is compromised. Official channels are compromised. Hell, reality might be compromised. We're on our own." 3:45. Inya picked up something on her equipment that made her face go white. "There's massive electromagnetic activity building at each nuclear site. Not the kind you'd expect from weapons preparation, something else. The readings are..." She paused, checking her instruments again. "Varek, the readings are suggesting dimensional instability. Like the barriers between realities are being systematically weakened. Through the bunker's small observation window, I could see the city above us. Streams of people walking through the streets in perfect formation, all heading in the same direction. No cars, no chaos, no panic. Just orderly, synchronized movement toward whatever was waiting at the coordinates. It was the most efficient emergency evacuation I'd ever witnessed. And it was absolutely terrifying. For 30, I made the hardest decision of my career. I activated my emergency override codes that I was only supposed to use if the entire government had been compromised, and began broadcasting on all available frequencies. This is Emergency Coordinator Varek Sloan to any independent emergency management personnel still operating. Official protocols have been compromised. Repeat, official emergency protocols have been compromised. The final contingency is not a nuclear defense operation. It is a coordinated effort to facilitate dimensional breach using human populations as willing participants. The response was immediate. Every emergency frequency lit up with synchronized voices all saying the same thing. "Coordinator Sloan, You are interfering with essential species evolution protocols. Report for final contingency preparation immediately. But underneath the coordinated responses, I caught fragments of independent voices. Other emergency coordinators, isolated military units, technical specialists who'd been shielded from the signal somehow. We weren't completely alone. 5:15, as dawn approached, the countdown reached T-4 hours. The electromagnetic readings Enya was monitoring spiked dramatically, and she reported something that made my blood freeze. Varek, I'm detecting dimensional anomalies at each nuclear site. Small ones, just briefly, but the barriers are definitely weakening. Whatever they're planning to bring through, they're already testing the boundaries. Through our communication equipment, we could hear the synchronized voices of the converted growing more excited, more reverent. The countdown wasn't just marking time until nuclear detonation. It was marking time until something vast and alien stepped into our reality. 6 o'clock, day 3. T-3 hours, 27 minutes. I'm no longer writing this as an official emergency management log. Official emergency management has been compromised, possibly for decades. I'm writing this as a warning, a record, maybe a last testament. The emergency I trained my entire career to handle was never nuclear war, natural disaster, or terrorist attack. It was this: the day our own crisis response infrastructure would be turned against us to facilitate our species' delivery to something that views our reality as nothing more than a territory to be claimed. The protocols failed because they were designed to fail. The systems collapsed because they were designed to collapse. The emergency management network I dedicated my life to building was always intended to manage this specific emergency by ensuring it succeeded. But we're still here, still independent, still human, and T-3 hours is still 3 hours. The real emergency response starts now. Log continues. Accessing requires independent authentication. Signal integrity compromised. Switching to manual backup systems. The countdown is accelerating. Emergency management log, day 3, 6 o'clock hours. Coordinator, Varek Sloan. Status, protocol deviation authorized. The first detonation was supposed to happen at 6:15. Beijing time zone, coordinates that Enya had traced to some ancient temple complex buried under the city's financial district. I was watching the seismic monitors when the readings came through. What I saw broke every law of physics I thought I understood. Varek, you need to see this. Enya's voice cracked over the comm. She'd been awake for 36 hours straight, tracking electromagnetic anomalies that were now spiking off every instrument we had left functional. The explosion, it's not behaving like any nuclear event in our database. I pulled up the satellite feed on my screen. Where Beijing's financial district should have been vaporized, consumed by atomic fire, something else entirely was happening. The blast hadn't expanded outward in the familiar mushroom cloud. Instead, it had torn upward, a column of impossible light that seemed to bend space around itself. Radiation readings? I asked, though my hands were already moving across the keyboard, pulling up every monitoring station within 1,000 kilometers. That's just it, Enya said. There's radiation, but it's wrong. The signatures don't match any isotope we know. And the electromagnetic interference isn't coming from the blast, it's coming from whatever's inside that light. I stared at the screen. Through the column of twisted light, something was moving. Something vast and angular that hurt to look at directly, like my eyes couldn't process the geometry of what I was seeing. Draven, report, I barked into the comm. Static answered me. Then finally his voice, distant and filled with something I'd never heard from him before. Fear. Varek, my people near the Beijing coordinates. They're not responding to orders anymore. Last transmission was. He paused, and I could hear paper rustling. Jesus Christ, Varek. They're not speaking English anymore. It's like they're chanting. My blood turned to ice water. Chanting what? I don't know. But every unit within 50 kilometers of ground zero is doing it. Same words, same rhythm. And they're all walking toward the light. I looked at Sorel, who had gone pale as death. She was monitoring civilian evacuation centers, coordinating with shelters across the Pacific region. Her screen showed something that made my stomach drop. The evacuation centers, she whispered. They're not shelters. Look at the satellite imagery. She pulled up aerial views of the facilities we'd been directing civilians to for the past 18 hours. What I saw made me understand that we'd been played from the very beginning. The evacuation centers were arranged in perfect geometric patterns around each nuclear facility. Not random emergency sites, carefully planned positions that formed symbols I was beginning to recognize from Quinrich's classified files. Symbols that had been showing up in government communications for months. "We've been hurting them," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "All of our evacuation protocols, we've been moving people exactly where they wanted them." "Varek," Quinrich's voice came from behind me, quiet and broken. "I need to tell you something. About the final contingency. About what I helped design." I turned to face him, and saw in his eyes the weight of knowledge that had been crushing him for weeks. The nuclear weapons, they were never meant to be weapons at all, were they? He shook his head slowly. Catalysts, dimensional anchors, the radiation, the electromagnetic fields, the precise positioning, it creates tears in reality itself. And the people in the evacuation centers. They're not evacuees, I finished. They're congregation. Willing participants, Quinrich confirmed. The entities, they can't force their way into our reality. They need human cooperation, belief. The ultimatum, the fear, the evacuation orders, it's all been designed to create a population of willing participants. On my screen, a second detonation lit up the European continent. Moscow this time, and the same impossible column of light tore through the sky. Within minutes, every communication system in the region was broadcasting the same message in a dozen languages. Not a message of war or destruction. A message of welcome. "Citizens of Earth," the voice said, and I realized it was coming from the people themselves, thousands of voices speaking in perfect unison. "The final contingency has begun. Join us in the light. Join us in the new reality." I watched the satellite feeds as streams of people began walking toward the light columns. Not running in panic, not fleeing in terror. Walking with purpose, with joy, with the measured pace of pilgrims approaching a holy site. "Inya," I said, my voice barely steady. "How many more detonations?" According to the pattern Quinrich showed us, 4 more. Sydney, Lagos, Mexico City, and... She paused, checking her calculations. New York. New York. My city. The place where I'd spent 15 years building emergency protocols, training for disasters, preparing for the unthinkable. I'd never prepared for this. "Draven, status on your remaining units?" 40% converted and walking toward the light. 30% refusing orders and going rogue. The rest. His voice broke. The rest are asking me to join them. They say it's beautiful, Varek. They say reality is finally going to make sense. I looked around the emergency command center that had been my world for the past 3 days. At Inya, whose technical expertise had guided us through every crisis until now. At Sorel, whose compassion had helped us save thousands of lives. At Quinrich, whose hidden knowledge had been both our salvation and our damnation. And I realized that every protocol I'd ever memorized, every emergency procedure I'd drilled into my bones, every contingency plan I'd ever developed, none of it mattered now. We were facing something beyond human systems, beyond human comprehension. Something that had been planning this moment for decades, using our own infrastructure against us, turning our emergency preparedness into the mechanism of our surrender. "Sir," Inya said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission. It's from the Beijing site, from the people who were converted." I nodded, though every instinct screamed at me not to listen. But I needed to understand. I needed to know what we were truly fighting. The voice that came through the speakers was human, but changed. Layered with harmonics that shouldn't exist, speaking with knowledge that no human should possess. "Emergency Coordinator Sloan," it said, and I recognized the voice of Colonel Hayes, who'd been stationed at the Beijing perimeter. "You have served your purpose well. The evacuation protocols you designed, the communication networks you maintained, the trust you built, all of it has brought us to this moment." "Hayes," I said, knowing it was useless but needing to try. "This isn't you. Fight it." "I am more myself than I have ever been," the voice replied. "I can see the pattern now, Varek. The beautiful pattern that connects all things. The mathematics of reality itself. Join us, and you will understand. Continue to resist, and you will be swept away when the final anchor points are established. The transmission cut out, leaving us in silence broken only by the hum of our failing equipment and the distant rumble of aircraft overhead, aircraft that were no longer responding to any earthly command structure. I looked at my team, at these people who had trusted me to lead them through the impossible, and made the hardest decision of my career. "We're going off protocol," I said. "Everything we've been trained to do, every procedure we've followed, it's all been compromised. From now on, we operate on pure human instinct and whatever we can figure out ourselves." Sorel nodded grimly. "What about the remaining evacuation centers?" "We warn them. We tell them the truth, even if they don't believe us. Even if it causes panic." I turned to Quinric. "And you're going to tell us everything. Every detail about how this works, how to stop it, how to save whoever can still be saved." "Varek," Enya said, her voice small. "The New York detonation is scheduled for 13:33 local time. That's 7 hours from now. 7 hours to understand decades of planning. 7 hours to counter an invasion that had been generations in the making. 7 hours to save a world that was already half converted to something we couldn't even comprehend." I looked at the screens showing the impossible light columns, at the streams of people walking toward their own transformation, at the reports flooding in of reality itself beginning to break down around the anchor points. And I realized that my 15 years of emergency management training had been preparation for this moment. Not because I'd learned the right protocols, but because I'd learned how to coordinate human action in the face of the impossible. The emergency I'd trained for my whole life had finally begun. But the real emergency wasn't the nuclear detonations or the dimensional tears or the entities stepping through from whatever hell they'd been waiting in. The real emergency was that humanity was choosing to surrender itself willingly, one evacuation center at a time. And we had 7 hours to figure out how to make them want to stay human. Emergency status, critical. Conversion rate, 47% and climbing. Anchor points established, 2 of 6. Time to final convergence, 7 hours, 21 minutes. Next entry, Day 3, 13:33 hours, survival mode. Emergency management log, Day 3, 12 o'clock hours. Coordinator, Varek Sloan. Status, underground operations. Location, maintenance level C, Federal Building Complex. The official shelters were death traps. We discovered that 90 minutes ago when Sorel tried to establish contact with Emergency Shelter Delta 7, where we'd sent 300 civilians yesterday. The response came back in that same harmonized chanting, 300 voices speaking as one, welcoming us to join them in the beautiful convergence. Now we're in the building's maintenance tunnels, 40 feet below street level, surrounded by pipes that carry water and electrical cables that spark every time reality hiccups around us. It's not in any emergency manual I've ever read, but it's the only place left where we can think clearly. The conversion field has a limited range, Quinric explained as we huddled around Enya's salvaged equipment. Approximately 12 kilometers from each anchor point. The entities need line of sight to the dimensional tears to maintain their influence. Underground, with enough concrete and steel between us and the surface, we have a window of cognitive autonomy. I wanted to hit him. 15 years I'd worked with government scientists, and none of them had ever mentioned that our emergency protocols were designed by someone who knew about conversion fields and cognitive autonomy. "How long have you known?" I asked. "About the true nature of the final contingency?" 23 years. "About my specific role in it?" He looked away. 7 months. "When they activated me." "Activated you?" Enya's voice was flat, dangerous. "Like a sleeper agent. More like a failsafe. They needed someone with legitimate emergency management credentials to ensure the evacuation protocols would be followed. Someone who would believe in the cover story long enough to make it convincing." Quinric's hands shook as he spoke. "I was supposed to kill myself after the New York detonation. Leave behind research notes that would help the survivors understand their new world." Sorel had been quiet since we'd fled underground, monitoring her tablet for any signals from the evacuation centers. Now she looked up with eyes that had aged decades in the past few hours. "The children's centers," she said. "They took the children first. Every pediatric facility, every school that we designated as a safe zone. The kids were the most willing to believe, the most eager to help, the most." Her voice broke. "They used our own compassion against us. Through the concrete above us, we could hear the rumbling. Not explosions, something worse. The sound of thousands of people moving in perfect coordination, their footsteps synchronized as they marched toward the dimensional tiers. The sound of humanity reorganizing itself according to alien mathematics." "Enya," I said, "what's our communication status?" "Patchy. The conversion fields interfere with most frequencies, but I'm picking up signals from other underground groups. Seems like the same thing happened in Beijing and Moscow. Some people figured out that going underground bought them time." She adjusted her improvised antenna array. "I've got maybe 6 hours of battery power left, and then we're completely isolated." 6 hours. In 6 hours, the New York detonation would create the third anchor point, and according to Quinrich's research, 3 anchor points would allow the entities to establish a stable reality matrix. Whatever that meant, I was certain it was nothing good. "Draven status report," I said into the comm. Static answered me for a long moment. Then his voice, strained and distant. "Hold up in subway station 42nd Street with maybe 30 soldiers who haven't been converted. We can hear them above us, Varek. Thousands of them. They're not just marching, they're building something." "Building what?" "Structures. But not human structures. The geometry is all wrong. Angles that shouldn't exist, materials that look like they're growing rather than being assembled. And the sound." He paused. "The sound they make while they work. It's like singing, but the harmonies are designed to break human minds." I closed my eyes and tried to process what we were facing. Emergency management protocols assume that in any crisis, there will be some infrastructure left to work with, some chain of command to follow, some population of rational actors who want to survive. We had none of that. The infrastructure was compromised at the fundamental level. The chain of command had been infiltrated for decades, and the population was willingly transforming itself into something that no longer qualified as human. "Quinrich," I said, "in your research, did you find any way to reverse the conversion process?" "There are variables," he said carefully. "The entities require active participation. If someone is converted against their will, or if their conversion is incomplete, there's a theoretical possibility of restoration. But it would require direct intervention at the neural level, and we'd need access to medical facilities that—" He gestured helplessly at our underground hideout. "That don't exist anymore," I finished. "There's something else," Enya said, her voice tight with concentration as she worked on her equipment. "I'm monitoring emergency frequencies across the continent, and I'm picking up other groups like us. People who figured out the underground strategy, who are maintaining some level of organized resistance." She patched through a signal, and a voice filled our cramped space. Female, authoritative, speaking with the kind of calm professionalism that I recognized from years of emergency coordination. "Chicago Emergency Coordinator Martinez reporting. We have approximately 200 unconverted civilians in the lower Wacker tunnel system. Medical supplies critically low, but we've maintained cognitive autonomy for 18 hours. Requesting coordination with other resistance cells for resource sharing and tactical planning." I grabbed the microphone. "Martinez, this is Sloan in New York. We copy your transmission. What's your assessment of the conversion timeline?" "Sloan, thank God. We estimate the Chicago anchor point will be established in approximately 14 hours, concurrent with the New York event. After that," her voice wavered slightly, "after that, our models suggest complete continental coverage within 72 hours. 72 hours for the entities to claim every human being in North America. And we were hiding in tunnels like rats, burning through our limited supplies while the world transformed above us. Do we have any assets?" I asked. "Anything we can use to disrupt the process?" "Negative on government resources. Everything's compromised. But we've made contact with several isolated military units and civilian groups. If we could coordinate a simultaneous strike at all anchor points. The timing would have to be perfect, Draven's voice cut in from his position. "And we'd need to understand exactly how the anchor points function." "Quinric?" All eyes turned to our tame trader. Quinric looked like he'd aged a decade in the past few hours, the weight of his hidden knowledge finally crushing his shoulders. "The anchor points are self-sustaining once established," he said, "but they require a continuous stream of converted humans to maintain stability. If we could disrupt the human flow to all anchor points simultaneously, the dimensional tears would collapse." "How many people are we talking about?" Sorel asked. "Thousands, at each site, and they would need to be removed from the equation, either converted back or—" He didn't finish the sentence. The implications hung in the air like poison gas. We were talking about a coordinated action against thousands of our own people. People who had been transformed against their will, who might still be saved, but who were currently serving as living batteries for an alien invasion. My emergency management training had covered a lot of worst-case scenarios. Mass casualty events, infrastructure collapse, civil disorder, nuclear accidents. It had never covered the systematic elimination of converted humans to save reality itself. "There has to be another way," Sorel said. "Maybe there is," Enya said, looking up from her equipment with something like hope in her eyes. "I've been analyzing the signal patterns from the anchor points. The entities are using human neural networks as processing power, but they're not just controlling the converted, they're learning from them. Every human mind they absorb makes them more effective at converting others. So they're vulnerable to information warfare. If we could introduce corrupted data into their network, conflicting commands, paradoxical instructions, recursive loops, we might be able to crash their entire system from the inside." I felt the first stirring of actual hope since this nightmare began. "What would you need?" "Access to the conversion network, which means one of us would have to get close enough to an anchor point to tap into the signal stream." She looked around at our faces. "And whoever does it would almost certainly be converted in the process." Silence filled the tunnel, broken only by the distant rumbling of construction above and the steady drip of water from corroded pipes. I looked at my team, these people who had trusted me to lead them through crisis, who had followed me into the underground when every instinct screamed at them to run to the surface and surrender to the beautiful light. Enya, whose technical genius might be our only hope of striking back at the network itself. Sorel, whose compassion had saved hundreds of lives and who might be the key to reaching unconverted humans. Draven, whose military expertise was keeping scattered resistance cells alive. And Quinric, whose knowledge of the enemy's plans made him both essential and dangerous. One of us was going to have to sacrifice themselves to give the others a chance. And as the emergency coordinator, as the person responsible for making the impossible decisions, I already knew who that would be. But first, we had to survive the next 6 hours. First, we had to stay human long enough to remember why that mattered. "Enya," I said, "how long would you need to prep the data corruption package?" 3 hours, maybe 4. But I'd need processing power, and our equipment down here is barely functional. Then we go back up, I decided. We find a location with better equipment, close enough to the anchor point to be effective, but far enough away to avoid immediate conversion. "That's suicide," Draven said. "Maybe, but staying down here is definitely suicide. They know we're here. It's only a matter of time before they start pumping conversion gas into the tunnel system, or flooding us out, or just waiting for our supplies to run out." I looked at my watch. 5 hours and 47 minutes until the New York detonation. 5 hours and 47 minutes to either save the world or watch it die. "We move in 30 minutes, I said. "Gather everything essential, destroy everything we can't carry. And if anyone has a better plan than hack the alien invasion network, now would be a great time to share it." Nobody did. Above us, the sound of construction continued, and I tried not to think about what kind of structures required human minds as building materials. Emergency status, critical. Conversion rate, 63% and climbing. Anchor points established, 2 of 6. Resistance cells active, 7 confirmed. Time to final convergence, 5 hours, 47 minutes. Next entry, Day 3, 1800 hours, the price of resistance. Day 4, 6 o'clock hours, emergency management log. Coordinator, Varek Sloan. Status, protocol deviation critical. The static cleared at 6:17, and Inya's voice came through the jury-rigged radio with crystal clarity for the first time in 18 hours. Varek, I'm getting clean signals from Moscow, Beijing, and London. The pattern's holding. They're all transmitting the same frequency burst every 33 minutes. Her words carried that familiar professional crispness, but underneath I heard something that made my chest tighten. Finality. Copy that. What's your power situation? I asked, though we both knew the answer. The emergency generator powering her makeshift communication hub had been running on fumes since yesterday. 12 minutes left, maybe 15 if I shut down life support. She said it like discussing weather patterns. But Varek, I've isolated the control signal. The converted humans, they're receiving direct neural commands through these frequency bursts. If we can disrupt the pattern simultaneously across all sites. Draven's voice crackled in from the northern quadrant. Sloan, we've got movement. Convoy of converted military heading straight for Inya's position. 20 vehicles, full combat loadout. ETA 8 minutes. I stared at the tactical map spread across the concrete floor of our underground refuge. Red pins marked enemy positions, blue marked allies. There were so few blue pins left. Inya's position sat in a widening circle of red, completely surrounded. Inya, you need to evacuate now, I said into the radio. Negative. I'm downloading everything, satellite feeds, frequency patterns, the entire network topology. This is our only chance to understand how they're coordinating globally. The sound of gunfire echoed through her transmission. Besides, where exactly would I go? She was right. The reality distortion zones had expanded overnight, creating pockets where physics failed entirely. Streets that led in impossible directions. Buildings that existed only from certain angles. The converted humans moved through these areas like they belonged there, while normal people became lost in geometric impossibilities. Draven, can you reach your position? I asked. A long pause. Negative. We're pinned down at grid reference Delta 7. Lost Thompson and Valdez in the reality bleed. The remaining squad. Static burst across the channel. When Draven's voice returned, it was strained. The remaining squad is requesting permission to engage in close quarters combat with unknown entities. Conventional weapons are having zero effect. I closed my eyes. Draven was feeding me military protocol because it was the only way he could process what they were facing. Unknown entities. As if that phrase could contain the things that had been crawling out of the blast craters for the past 2 days. Permission granted, I said, because that's what protocol demanded, even though we both knew it was a death sentence. Quinric looked up from the tablet, where he'd been frantically scrolling through decades of classified research. His face had aged 10 years since his confession yesterday. How he'd helped design the original summoning protocols, thinking they were theoretical models for dimensional physics. How the final contingency had always been about opening doorways, not launching missiles. There's something else, he said quietly. The entities, they're not just invading our reality. They're replacing it. Every hour that passes, more of our physical laws get overwritten with theirs. Eventually, this world will become fully compatible with their existence, and we'll be the ones who can't survive here. Inya's voice burst through the static again, urgent now. I'm tracking mass civilian movement toward all the blast sites. Thousands of people, walking in perfect synchronization. They're not converted, their neural patterns are still human, but they're being drawn toward the entities like pilgrims, I finished. Sorel had reported similar behavior from the evacuation centers before we lost contact with her team 12 hours ago. The sound of explosions echoed through Inya's transmission. Contact! They've breached the outer perimeter. Uploading final data burst now. Varek, you need to know the frequency pattern isn't random. It's matching astronomical alignments that occur every 73 years. This was planned before any of us were born. My radio erupted with overlapping voices. Draven's tactical commands. Inya's data readouts. Status reports from the few remaining emergency stations worldwide. And underneath it all, a sound that made my skin crawl, singing. Thousands of human voices raised in perfect harmony, audible through every microphone across the network. All stations, this is Emergency Coordinator Sloan. Implement Protocol 77 Alpha immediately. I was making up protocols now, but my voice carried the authority of 15 years in emergency management. Secure all data regarding frequency disruption. Prepare for communication blackout. Varek, Enya's voice was calm now, professional to the end. The singing, I'm picking up the source. It's not coming from the converted humans. It's coming from the blast sites themselves. The entities are responding to the civilian pilgrimage. Through my periscope, I could see them in the distance, streams of ordinary people walking steadily toward the nearest blast crater. Families holding hands. Children skipping alongside their parents. All moving with the same measured pace, all facing the same direction, all humming the same impossible melody. Enya, get out of there. That's a direct order. Sorry, Varek. I'm not under your command anymore. None of us are. The sound of gunfire intensified. The data upload is at 80%. Whatever happens next, you'll have everything we've learned. Draven's voice cut through the chaos. Sloan, we're being overrun. These things, they're not just monsters. They're smart. They're using military tactics, but wrong somehow. Like they learned our strategies, but don't understand why we use them. Fall back to secondary positions, I ordered. There are no secondary positions. Draven's professionalism finally cracked. The whole grid system is compromised. Streets are changing layout in real time. My GPS is showing roads that don't exist and missing ones we're standing on. We're fighting an enemy that can rewrite the battlefield while we're on it. The tablet in front of me showed Enya's final data stream, satellite imagery revealing the full scope of the disaster. Every major city showed the same pattern. Blast craters surrounded by expanding zones of reality distortion, with rivers of civilians flowing toward each site. The global death toll had stopped being calculable when the laws of physics started breaking down. Upload complete, Enya announced. Varek, I need you to understand something. The entities aren't evil. They're not even really conscious in any way we'd recognize. They're more like natural forces. The evil is what we did. What people like me helped design 70 years ago. We opened the door and rang the dinner bell. Enya, the frequency disruption will work, but it has to be coordinated. Every blast site simultaneously. You'll need someone at each location who understands the technical specifications. A pause. And Varek, the converted humans can be saved. The neural control isn't permanent, but someone has to reach them before the reality transformation completes. The last explosion, through her microphone, shook dust from the ceiling of my bunker. When the static cleared, I heard something that would haunt me forever. Enya's voice, but changed. Still her words, her inflection, but with an underlying harmony that matched the global singing. The pattern is beautiful, Varek. You should see it from this perspective. Everything connected, everything purposeful. The entities aren't destroying our reality, they're completing it. We've been living in an unfinished world. I cut the transmission. Draven's voice came through the radio one final time, barely audible over the sound of impossible things. Emergency Coordinator Sloan, Staff Sergeant Cross reporting. My unit is Kia. Repeat, my unit is Kia. But the entities, they're not killing us. They're changing us. I can feel it starting. The way they think, it's actually more logical than. Static consumed the channel. I sat alone in the concrete bunker with Quinric, surrounded by emergency protocols that meant nothing, staring at a world map where every blue pin had turned red in the space of 6 hours. The tablet displayed Enya's final data upload, terabytes of information about frequency patterns, entity behavior, and global coordination requirements. Outside, I could hear the singing growing louder. Quinric looked up from his research files, tears streaming down his face. They trusted me. Enya, Draven, even Sorel before she was captured. They followed my technical expertise right into this nightmare. The expertise that might save us, I said, though my voice sounded hollow. Might save what's left, he corrected. The world we knew ended 2 days ago. We're just deciding what replaces it. The bunker's emergency lighting flickered, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Through the thick concrete walls, the singing was becoming a physical sensation, vibrations that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my bones. I picked up the radio one more time and tried the emergency broadcast frequency. Nothing but static and that damned harmony. Every government station, every military frequency, every emergency service, all singing the same impossible song. According to my protocols, this was the point where I should declare total mission failure and initiate evacuation procedures. But evacuation to where? The emergency shelters had become recruitment centers. The safe zones were reality distortion fields. The backup communication networks were broadcasting alien lullabies. I was an emergency management coordinator with no emergency management system left to coordinate. But I still had Enya's data. I still had Quinric's knowledge. And somewhere out there, Sorel was alive among the converted humans, possibly still fighting from within their ranks. The protocols had failed, but the human network, damaged, scattered, transformed, still existed. I opened Enya's final transmission log and began planning the impossible, a coordinated global resistance using emergency management principles to fight reality itself. Because that's what emergency coordinators do. When everything falls apart, we make new protocols, even if we have to save the world from the outside in. Day 4, 23:47 hours. Personnel status, Enya Lark, Kia/converted. Draven Cross, Kia/converted. Sorel Marsh, MIA/compromised. Mission status, catastrophic failure. Initiating emergency protocol Omega. Note, traditional command structure has collapsed. Switching to distributed resistance network model. Personal note, I'm sorry, Enya. I'm sorry, Draven. I'll find a way to bring you back. Day 5, midnight hours, underground facility. Emergency log, Varric Sloan. Status, operating outside all known protocols. The singing stopped at exactly midnight. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the constant harmony had been. For 18 hours, that otherworldly chorus had provided a baseline of dread, horrible but predictable. Now the world held its breath, and in that silence, I heard something that made every emergency management instinct I possessed scream warnings. Individual voices, human voices, scattered across the radio frequencies like survivors calling out in the dark. This is Dr. Elizabeth Kane, Centers for Disease Control, Atlanta. Day 5 of the event. If anyone is receiving this transmission, we have discovered critical information about the conversion process. I grabbed the radio, hands shaking. Dr. Kane, this is Emergency Coordinator Varric Sloan. Please confirm your status. Coordinator Sloan, thank God. We have a situation update. The converted individuals, they retain their original personalities and memories. Repeat, conversion is not mind replacement. It's more like mandatory perspective expansion. Quinric looked up from the research files scattered across our concrete floor. His eyes were bloodshot from 72 hours of continuous analysis, but something had changed in his expression. Hope, maybe, or the absence of despair. Enya tried to tell me, I said quietly. In her final transmission, she said the pattern was beautiful. Because it is beautiful from their perspective, Dr. Kane's voice continued through the static. We've been monitoring neural activity in converted subjects. Their human consciousness remains intact, but they're perceiving additional dimensional layers we can't access. They're not enslaved, they're expanded. Another voice broke through on a different frequency. Melbourne Emergency Services here. We've established contact with converted personnel. They're trying to help us understand. The entities aren't invading, they're offering integration. Quinric stood abruptly, scattering research papers. That's what I missed. The mathematical models I helped design weren't for conquest. They were for translation, making our reality compatible with theirs. I stared at him. Translation for what purpose? Survival, he said simply. Varric, look at this. He pulled up a satellite image on the tablet. Real-time view of North America taken 4 hours ago. See the blast craters? They're not expanding randomly. They're following underground water systems, mineral deposits, tectonic stress points. The entities are strengthening our geological foundation. The radio crackled again. This time the voice was familiar, though changed. Varric, can you hear me? It's Draven. My throat constricted. Draven? What's your status? Complicated. That was definitely Draven's dry humor, though his voice carried harmonics that made my teeth ache. I'm still me, but more than me. I can see the tactical situation from perspectives that don't exist in 3 dimensions. Varek, the entities aren't hostile. They're emergency responders. Emergency responders? Our reality was collapsing. Has been for decades. Climate breakdown, nuclear proliferation, resource depletion. We were heading for total civilizational collapse within 30 years. The entities detected the distress signal. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What distress signal? The one we've been broadcasting since 1952. Every nuclear test, every reactor meltdown, every weapons buildup, it's all been screaming into higher dimensions that we're a species in crisis. Dr. Kane's voice rejoined the conversation. The coordinator is correct. We've identified the mechanism. Nuclear fission creates dimensional tears. Small ones, but cumulative. For 70 years, we've been punching holes in reality and leaking distress signals. Quinric collapsed into a chair, his face pale. The final contingency wasn't a weapon system. It was an SOS. We built a global emergency beacon without knowing it. And someone answered, Draven continued. But they couldn't just fix our problems from the outside. Integration had to be voluntary, or it would destroy the very consciousness they were trying to save. Another transmission joined the network. This is Sorel Marsh, Civilian Coordinator Section 7. Varek, are you receiving? Sorel. Relief flooded through me. Your status? I'm in what you'd classify as a conversion center, but it's more like orientation. The civilians who came here, they weren't mind-controlled. They were responding to a recruitment call. The entities need human consciousness to understand how to properly integrate our realities. Recruitment for what? Emergency management, Varek. Cosmic scale emergency management. Our planet isn't the only one in crisis. There are entire galactic regions dealing with reality collapse. The entities are like interdimensional emergency responders, and they need local expertise. I sat down hard, my mind reeling. 15 years of emergency management training, and I'd never considered that the emergency might be bigger than a single world. So the conversion process. I began. Voluntary expansion of consciousness to enable cross-dimensional coordination, Sorel explained. I'm still me, but I can perceive the scope of what we're dealing with. Varek, there are 17 other worlds in our local dimensional cluster experiencing reality breakdown. The entities have been coordinating rescue operations for millennia. Quinric was frantically scrolling through his research files. The frequency patterns, they're not control signals. They're coordination protocols, like emergency radio frequencies, but for dimensional communication. Exactly, Draven's voice confirmed. And the synchronized timing of the ultimatum? That wasn't about nuclear war. That was about opening enough dimensional gateways simultaneously to enable large-scale consciousness transfer. Dr. Kane added, the governments that issued the ultimatum, they've been in contact with the entities for decades. The final contingency was always an emergency evacuation plan, not a weapon system. They were just waiting for the crisis to reach the point where mass intervention became necessary. I looked around the bunker, at the emergency protocols that had become obsolete overnight, at the communication equipment repurposed for interdimensional contact, at Quinric hunched over research that suddenly made terrifying sense. But why keep it secret? I asked. Because voluntary participation was essential, Sorel answered. If people knew they were being recruited for interdimensional emergency management, how many would have the psychological framework to handle it? But if they thought they were responding to a local crisis, they'd use their existing emergency response instincts, I finished, which would make the consciousness integration smoother. Exactly. Emergency management professionals like us were always the primary recruitment targets. We already think in terms of coordination, resource allocation, crisis response. We're psychologically prepared for impossible situations. Inya's voice joined the network, and my heart nearly stopped. Hello, Varek. I'm sorry I scared you during the transition. The perspective shift is intense. Inya, you're alive? More alive than I've ever been. I can see the communication networks we're building, not just on Earth, but connecting to 47 other worlds currently undergoing integration. Varek, we're becoming part of the largest emergency management system in the galaxy. I stared at the radio, trying to process what I was hearing. And if we refuse integration? Silence for a long moment. Then Draven answered, then we continue on our current trajectory. Civilizational collapse within 30 years, complete ecosystem failure within 50, extinction within 75. The entities won't force integration, but they can't prevent the natural consequences of our reality breakdown either. However, Dr. Kane added, integration doesn't require abandoning human identity. The converted individuals retain their human consciousness, relationships, and values. They just gain the ability to perceive and respond to multidimensional crises. Quinric looked up at me. The choice is real, Varek. I've been analyzing the data for 5 days straight. Integration is genuinely voluntary, and the entities will honor any decision to remain purely human. But someone needs to coordinate the emergency response either way, I said. Exactly. And you're one of the most experienced emergency coordinators left who hasn't integrated yet. The entities need human perspective on how to manage the transition without causing more trauma than necessary. I stood up and walked to the periscope, looking out at the transformed landscape. In the distance, I could see the blast crater that had been downtown. Instead of destruction, there was something that looked like a vast crystalline structure reaching impossibly upward, with streams of light connecting it to similar structures visible on the horizon. What happens to Earth if we integrate? I asked. Earth becomes part of the Interdimensional Emergency Response Network, Enya replied. Think of it as joining a cosmic version of FEMA. We keep our planet, our cultures, our humanity. But we also gain the ability to help other worlds avoid the crisis we were heading toward. And the people who don't want to integrate, they remain human and help maintain Earth's unique perspective within the network. Every successful integration requires some individuals to remain unaltered, to preserve the original consciousness patterns. Sorel's voice carried a smile I could somehow hear. Varek, you trained your whole career for coordinating emergency response in impossible situations. This is just a bigger impossible situation. I looked at Quinric, who was staring at me with an expression I recognized from 15 years of emergency management. The look people get when they realize the crisis is bigger than they thought, but the solution is still achievable. The frequency disruption plan, I said, if we wanted to stop the integration process. Would work, Draven confirmed. The gateways can be closed. Integration can be reversed. But the underlying crisis that triggered the emergency response, that would remain unsolved. So our choice is interdimensional integration or species extinction? Your choice is coordinated emergency response on a cosmic scale, or handling a planetary emergency with purely local resources, Dr. Kane corrected. Either way, you're still an emergency coordinator. The scope just expanded. I activated the emergency broadcast system one more time, but instead of reaching for local frequencies, I opened channels to the global network Enya had died to preserve. This is Emergency Coordinator Varek Sloan to all stations. I need a status report on integration willingness across all sectors. We have a choice to make, and we need to make it as a species. As responses began flooding in from around the globe, some from humans, some from integrated consciousness, all working toward the same goal, I realized that emergency management protocols don't change just because the emergency gets bigger. You assess the situation, coordinate resources, and implement the best available solution. Even if the solution involves joining an interdimensional emergency response network. Even if the emergency is reality itself. Day 5, 6 o'clock hours. Status update. Contact reestablished with full team. Integration confirmed as voluntary consciousness expansion, not replacement. Mission parameters. Expanded to include interdimensional emergency coordination. Personal note, still scared. Still responsible. Still an emergency coordinator. Just with a bigger jurisdiction now. Emergency management log, day 5, 12 o'clock. Coordinator, Varek Sloan. Status, unauthorized operations. Reality designation, compromised. The emergency broadcast equipment hums with jury-rigged power cables, snaking across the abandoned subway platform. 12 hours since Enya's sacrifice gave us the frequency patterns. 6 hours since we lost Draven holding the northern tunnel. 3 hours since Quinric's final transmission from inside the primary summoning site. Time moves differently now. The entity's presence warps everything. Clocks run backward near the gateway zones, shadows fall upward, and my emergency protocols feel like prayers to dead gods. But humans adapt. That's what we do. Varek, we're getting responses from Sao Paulo, reports Marcus Chin, one of the few telecommunications specialists who hasn't been converted. His voice carries the strain of 72 hours without real sleep. They've identified their gateway site, some kind of industrial complex that's been there since the 1950s. I mark it on the map spread across a maintenance crate. Red pins for confirmed gateway locations. Black pins for lost cities. Green pins for active resistance cells. The pattern Enya died to reveal shows clearly now, a perfect geometric network spanning 6 continents. Every nuclear facility positioned at an intersection point of something far older than atomic theory. Mumbai is ready, calls Sarah Kim from her position at the radio array. London confirms. Moscow has gone dark. 3 cities lost in the last hour. The entities strengthen their hold as more humans accept the new reality. I've seen the converted. They walk with purpose, speak in unison, their eyes reflecting depths that shouldn't exist in human skulls. But underneath, something human remains. Sorel proved that. My handheld crackles with Sorel's voice, transmitted from inside the Seattle containment zone. Varek, the converted are gathering in the central courtyard. Thousands of them. They're singing. Can you understand the words? It's not words. It's like a frequency. But Varek, her voice breaks with exhaustion and hope. Some of them are crying. Even while they sing, tears are running down their faces. The human part is still there. This is what Quinric's research revealed in those final desperate hours. The entities require willing cooperation, not just physical possession. Fear makes humans compliant, but love, genuine human connection, creates interference in their control signals. All stations, this is Emergency Coordinator Sloan. Execute Phase 7. The phrase feels strange in my mouth. Phase 7 doesn't exist in any official manual. I created it 3 hours ago, combining 20 years of crisis management experience with supernatural intelligence gathered by the dead and the converted. Sarah adjusts frequencies, broadcasting on every emergency channel simultaneously. Broadcasting on all networks. Military, civilian, emergency services, amateur radio. If there's a human with a working receiver anywhere on Earth, they'll hear this. I key the transmitter. My voice will reach every survivor, every resistance cell, every human still fighting in the shadow of the gateways. This is Emergency Management Coordinator Varek Sloan, speaking to all human resistance networks worldwide. The time is 1547 Universal Coordinated Time, Day 5 of the final contingency. I am declaring a global state of emergency under Protocol Omega. Protocol Omega. Another invention, but one that feels right. The last letter. The end of everything we knew, the beginning of what we might become. The entities controlling our governments, our military, our infrastructure, they are not invincible. They require human cooperation to maintain their hold on our reality. Every person who remembers their humanity weakens their grip. Marcus hands me a tablet showing response confirmations flooding in from around the globe. Sao Paulo ready. London ready. Tokyo ready. Resistance cells in 43 cities preparing for coordinated action. In 60 seconds, resistance teams will attempt to disrupt gateway operations at all identified sites. But the real battle isn't in those facilities. It's in the minds of our converted friends, family, and colleagues. Reach them. Remind them. Not with weapons, but with memory. I pause, thinking of Enya's last transmission, of Draven's final stand, of Quinric walking into the primary site knowing he wouldn't return. My colleagues died to give us this chance. Enya Lark gave her life maintaining our communications. Draven Cross held the line so others could escape. Quinric Vale walked into hell itself to plant the disruptor device. Their sacrifice means nothing if we fail now. The countdown reaches 30 seconds. On screens around the platform, I watch feeds from resistance cells worldwide. Improvised explosive devices positioned near gateway structures. Broadcast arrays aimed at containment zones. Humans approaching humans with open hands instead of weapons. Remember, the entities feed on fear and despair. They're weakened by hope, love, and human connection. Speak to the converted. Use their names. Share memories. Remind them who they were before the gateways opened. 15 seconds. This is not the emergency we trained for. This is not the protocol we memorized. But every skill we learned, every relationship we built, every moment we chose connection over isolation, all of it has prepared us for this moment. 10 seconds. Sarah's voice cuts through the static. Quinric's device is active. Primary gateway showing massive instability. 5 seconds. Execute Phase 7. Save our people. Save our world. Emergency Coordinator Sloan out. The platform erupts in coordinated chaos. Radio operators coordinate strikes across 6 continents. Computer specialists hack into entity-controlled broadcast systems, flooding them with human voices, human music, human memory. On the screens, I watch converted crowds in Seattle suddenly stop their synchronized movements as Sorel's voice carries across the containment zone, calling them by name, sharing stories of who they used to be. In Sao Paulo, a resistance team reaches their gateway site, just as the nuclear occult hybrid device begins its reality-warping pulse. But instead of explosives, they bring speakers broadcasting children's laughter, wedding songs, birthday celebrations, pure human joy at frequencies that make the entity technology scream and fail. London reports similar success. Tokyo. Mumbai comes back online as human voices break through the entity control frequencies. But the cost is immediate and brutal. Gateway sites are retaliating. Marcus shouts over the chaos of radio traffic. New York team is under attack. The converted are moving like a military unit now. On the tactical display, I watch red blips converging on resistance positions worldwide. The entities have abandoned subtlety. This is open war between humanity and something that views our existence as a territorial dispute. Sarah, patch me through to all resistance leaders. Emergency management protocol. Her fingers fly across the improvised communications array. You're live to all teams. This is Coordinator Sloan. Entity retaliation is heavy but expected. Remember your training. Establish fallback positions. Maintain communication redundancy. Protect civilian evacuees. But most importantly, do not abandon the converted. They're not the enemy. They're prisoners of war. In Seattle, Sorel's voice comes through clearly. Varek, it's working. The converted. Some of them are fighting the control. I can see them struggling. They're trying to break free. Keep talking to them. Use everything you remember. Names, faces, shared experiences. Make them remember they're human. The next 20 minutes blur into a symphony of coordination and chaos that no emergency management textbook ever prepared me for. I route resources between dimensions, coordinate rescue operations in reality-distorted zones, and maintain communication networks while the fundamental laws of physics negotiate new terms with otherworldly intelligence. But it works. Gateway after gateway falls silent as human connection proves stronger than alien technology. The converted don't just break free. They turn against their controllers with the fury of people who've been used against their own families. Primary site is down. Quinric's voice crackles through the static, weak but triumphant. The device worked. Reality distortion is collapsing back to baseline. Around the world, the same pattern repeats. Human voices calling to human hearts. Technology failing in the face of genuine emotion. Ancient entities retreating through closing gateways as their human collaborators remember what they're supposed to be fighting for. All stations, this is Coordinator Sloan. Phase 7 successful. Gateway closures confirmed on all continents. Begin Phase 8, recovery and stabilization. But even as I speak the words, I know Phase 8 will be harder than the battle. Because now we have to rebuild a world that knows monsters are real, that our governments were compromised for decades, that the emergency management systems we trusted were designed to facilitate invasion rather than prevention. Sarah looks up from her console, exhaustion and hope warring in her expression. Varek, we're getting messages from everywhere. Survivors asking for coordination. Government officials asking for orders. Military units requesting emergency management authority. I stare at the map, now marked with green pins spreading like new life across 6 continents. Humanity survived. But the world those humans are inheriting is fundamentally different from the one we woke up to 5 days ago. Send a message to all stations. Emergency Management Protocol Alpha 7 now in effect. Local coordinators establish civilian safety zones. Military units report to Emergency Management Authority for new command structure. Government officials report for debriefing and psychological evaluation. Marcus almost smiles. You're putting emergency management in charge of everything. Emergency management is designed to coordinate response when normal systems fail. I gesture toward the map, toward the evidence of our impossible victory. I'd say normal systems have definitely failed. The radio crackles with Sorel's voice, clear and strong. Varek, the converted are asking what happens now. They remember everything they did under entity control. They're asking for forgiveness. I close my eyes, thinking of Enya's sacrifice, Draven's courage, Quinric's redemption. Thinking of all the humans who fought to stay human, when staying human meant fighting the entire world. Tell them forgiveness is the first step of Phase 8. Tell them they're still human, and humans always find a way to rebuild. The emergency is over. The recovery is just beginning. Status report, Day 5, 1830 Universal Time. Coordinator, Varek Sloan. Phase 7, successful. Phase 8, initiated. Reality status, stabilized. Human status, victorious. End emergency log entry. Global Emergency Management Report, Day 30. Coordinator, Varek Sloan. Status, recovery phase ongoing. Reality designation, stable, monitoring required. The sun rises differently now. Not because the laws of physics changed, we restored those on Day 7, but because every sunrise carries the weight of what we almost lost. I watch it through the reinforced windows of what used to be the United Nations Emergency Coordination Center, what we now call the Global Human Network Headquarters. 30 days since the gateways closed. 25 days since the last confirmed entity sighting. 23 days since we established the new protocols. The emergency management model worked. When governments collapse and reality itself becomes unreliable, you fall back on the most basic human networks. Who needs help, who can provide it, and how to coordinate between them. Every small-town emergency coordinator, whoever managed a hurricane evacuation, was practicing for the day we'd have to rebuild civilization from scratch. Morning briefing, Coordinator Sloan. Sarah Kim enters with a tablet full of overnight reports. She's lost weight since the crisis, we all have, but there's something solid about her now. Purpose-built resilience. We've got 3 new cities requesting integration into the network, 2 potential infiltration warnings, and a priority message from Moscow. Moscow. I still think of Dmitry Volkov, their emergency coordinator who went silent during the final battle. His last transmission was coordinates for the Moscow Gateway site. We found his body there 3 weeks later, sitting at his desk with his hand on the broadcast trigger that saved his city. He never lived to see the entity's retreat. What's the situation in Moscow? They're requesting permission to decommission the Chernobyl Memorial Site. The radiation readings are impossible. Background levels dropping to pre-1986 standards. I set down my coffee, real coffee, shipped from Sao Paulo by emergency coordinators who've become the new international trade network. Explanation? Best guess? The entity technology required specific electromagnetic signatures to maintain gateway stability. When we forced the gateways closed, it apparently neutralized other dimensional intrusions, including whatever was maintaining the radiation at Chernobyl. Sarah pauses, studying the data. Varek, what if the entities weren't the first intrusion? What if they were just the most recent attempt? The thought sends ice through my veins. In the weeks since the crisis, we've discovered evidence of similar events throughout history. Mass disappearances, unexplained technological leaps, periods where human behavior changed dramatically for no recorded reason. The 1950s nuclear program that started this wasn't humanity's first brush with otherworldly influence. Add it to the research priority list. And increase monitoring protocols for all former gateway sites. I walk to the main operations center, where 43 screens display status updates from resistance cells that became municipal governments, emergency coordinators who became continental authority figures, and humans who learned that the people in charge were never actually in charge. Marcus Chin looks up from his coordination desk. 25 years old, he was a telecommunications intern when this started. Now he manages communication networks for half the European continent. Crisis creates leaders fast. Varek, we're getting reports from the Australian network. They've identified what they think is a pre-existing gateway site. Closed, but showing residual energy signatures. Age estimate? Geological survey suggests it's been dormant for approximately 12,000 years. 12,000 years. Right around the time human civilization suddenly developed agriculture, writing, and organized religion. All at once. All without clear evolutionary precedent. I think about Quinrich's research, still being analyzed by the few scientists we trust completely. The entities weren't invaders, they were returning visitors. Earth had been managed for millennia. Humanity had been guided, shaped, prepared for something. The nuclear age wasn't progress. It was the final phase of a cultivation project that took centuries to implement. We stopped them this time, but this time might not be the last time. Maintain surveillance on the Australian site. And Marcus? I pause, thinking about words that would have been impossible to say 31 days ago. Start developing protocols for dormant supernatural gateway monitoring. The phrase feels natural now. Emergency management has always been about preparing for scenarios you hope never happen. Now those scenarios include dimensional intrusions, reality distortions, and the possibility that human history itself has been a manipulation. Sorel's here for the memorial service, Sarah reports quietly. Of course. Today marks 1 month since Enya's death, since Draven's final stand, since Quinrich walked into hell to save us all. Sorel Marsh enters the operations center, and conversations pause. She's become something of a legend among the network coordinators. The woman who broke entity control through pure human empathy, who brought thousands of converted humans back to themselves with nothing but memory and love. Varek. Her voice carries the exhaustion of someone who spent 30 days helping traumatized people remember how to be human. The memorial is ready. Representatives from 63 cities are connected via emergency broadcast. Any word from the Australian site investigation? Dr. Martinez sent preliminary findings. The site shows evidence of multiple activation periods throughout human history. Bronze Age, Classical Antiquity, Medieval Period, Industrial Revolution. She pauses, meeting my eyes. And preparations for a 21st century activation that would have been permanent. Permanent. Not a temporary incursion, but a complete reality replacement. Humanity would have survived, but as managed livestock for intelligence that viewed our consciousness as an interesting side effect of useful biology. The memorial, I say finally. Let's honor the people who made sure that didn't happen. We gather in the communications center, surrounded by equipment that Enya died to preserve, using networks that Draven protected with his life, coordinating through systems that Quinrich's sacrifice made possible. On screens around the room, emergency coordinators from 6 continents stand at their own makeshift memorials. Enya Lark, I begin reading from notes written in my own handwriting. Personal words feel more important than official language now. Telecommunications specialist. She gave us the frequency patterns that broke entity control. She died maintaining the link that saved the world. Without her technical expertise and willingness to sacrifice everything, human communication networks would have fallen. 63 cities observe a moment of silence. Draven Cross, military liaison. He held defensive positions that allowed civilians to escape, resistance teams to organize, and vital intelligence to reach coordination centers. He fought with courage when courage meant facing impossible odds. His tactical knowledge and personal sacrifice enabled organized resistance. Another moment of silence, this one carrying the weight of military precision and honor. Quinrich Vale, government scientist. He provided the knowledge that revealed entity weaknesses, designed the technology that closed the primary gateway, and walked willingly into a supernatural death trap to plant devices he knew he wouldn't survive activating. His expertise, redemption, and final sacrifice made victory possible. The longest silence yet. Quinric's betrayal and redemption taught us something essential about human nature. That people can change, that knowledge carries responsibility, and that second chances sometimes come at the ultimate price. These three people represent the thousands who died preventing humanity's transformation into something else's managed resource. They died human. They died free. They died to ensure others could remain the same. I look around the room, at young faces that have seen impossible things, at emergency coordinators who learned to manage reality distortions like hurricane evacuations, at humans who discovered they were stronger than alien technology designed to control them. The emergency is over. The recovery continues, but the vigilance never ends. Sarah raises her hand. Coordinator Sloan, what's our status designation for ongoing operations? I consider the question. Traditional emergency management uses specific terminology for different phases of crisis response. But this situation requires new language for a new reality. Status designation, prepared. We are a species that now knows what else is out there. We are a civilization that has developed protocols for supernatural crisis management. We are humans who have built networks strong enough to resist mind control, deception, and reality manipulation. I pause, thinking about emergency management training that now includes courses on entity detection, dimensional gateway monitoring, and mass psychological resilience. Phase designation, eternal vigilance. The emergency management network that defeated the final contingency is now permanently operational. We coordinate disaster relief, international communication, and scientific research. We also monitor for signs of future intrusion attempts, maintain protocols for supernatural crisis response, and ensure human networks remain stronger than any technology designed to control them. Marcus looks up from his communications array. Varek, we're getting confirmation from all continental coordinators. The global human network is officially operational. 63 cities, 12 countries, 4 continents. All coordinated through emergency management protocols adapted for post-supernatural crisis civilization. Post-supernatural crisis civilization. The phrase should sound ridiculous. Instead, it sounds like hope. One more thing, Sorel says quietly. The converted humans, the ones we brought back. They're asking to join the monitoring network. They remember what entity control felt like from the inside. They say they can sense intrusions before our equipment detects them. Human early warning systems. People whose minds bear scars from otherworldly influence, now volunteering to be our canaries in the cosmic coal mine. It's horrifying and beautiful and perfectly human. Recruit them. Train them. Honor their experience and use their insights. They're not victims. They're veterans of a war most people can't imagine. The memorial service ends, but the conversation continues. Because this is what humans do. We adapt, we remember, we prepare for next time. We turn crisis into strength, tragedy into wisdom, and survival into the foundation for something better. The emergency alerts still come through the old systems, but the language has changed. Instead of nuclear ultimatums, we coordinate disaster relief. Instead of final contingencies, we share resources and knowledge. Instead of government deception, we maintain networks based on trust, transparency, and the understanding that human connection is stronger than any technology designed to break it. 3 months from now, the first class of graduates will complete the new emergency management curriculum, which includes courses that would have been science fiction 5 weeks ago. 6 months from now, the Australian Gateway site will be fully secured and monitored. 1 year from now, we'll have protocols for dozens of scenarios we hope never to use. But if they happen, when they happen, we'll be ready. Because that's what emergency management does. We prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and build networks strong enough to handle whatever reality throws at us. Even if reality includes things that shouldn't exist. Especially then. Final report. Global Emergency Management Network. Coordinator, Varek Sloan. Date, Day 30, post-final contingency. Status, vigilant. Human status, prepared. The emergency we trained for our whole lives was just practice. The real emergency was learning that practice was enough. Network operational. Protocols established. Humanity secured. Next crisis assessment, ongoing. End of report.